thank you again for everyone joining us. We're going to talk about how to design your onboarding plan. We're going to go through a bunch of things here all around that one topic. We're going to start with some really quick introductions, and then we're going to walk through, we're going to do this live. We're going to build an onboarding plan live so that you can go through all of these steps and see a finished product at the end. Although as Shareil will tell you, an onboarding plan is never finished. There's always plenty of room for iteration and improvement. But we're going to go through how to get started aligning on customer outcomes, how to map out the onboarding process that's going to line up with that, optimizing that plan to drive action. That's something that we see a lot is, folks put a plan in front of a customer, and then what happens when a customer actually needs to do the things? Like, how do you make sure they don't get stuck along the way and they're actually getting to those outcomes? How do you communicate that plan to customers? And then measuring and reporting on plan performance. We're going to keep this super tactical. As I mentioned, we're going to build the plan live on this workshop, and then we'll get into any questions at the end. So along the way, as we're going through this, if you have questions come up, if you see something that you'd like us to go deeper on, let us know in the chat. So really quick introductions. I'm Stuart Balcombe. I run marketing at Arrows. And at Arrows, we build customer-facing action plans that attach directly to your internal process in HubSpot. So you can use them for onboarding, you can use them for the sales process, you can use them for renewals, QBRs, what have you. Anytime you have a shared outcome that you want to get to with a customer and you have tasks that you need to do, tasks that the customer needs to do, an Arrows plan is a great way to get everybody aligned on what they need to do next to be successful. And then also joined by Shareil, who's really going to lead this one with this process that we're running, and Shareil's building at Arrows. He's head of customer success at Arrows, previously built and scaled onboarding teams at Sprout Social and Booking.com. Hey, Shareil.
Hey, thanks for having me. I love this specific workshop. I love all your workshops, but I'm a little biased to this one. But thanks to everyone for joining. Thanks for the time. Thanks for your interest in onboarding and in just creating a better customer experience. Let's get into it.
Cool. All right, so really quickly, I'm sure if you're here, you already have some thoughts about onboarding, and you're by being here, you clearly want to improve and learn more about onboarding. But high level, why care? Why should the business care about onboarding? Well, because onboarding is really important to the growth of a business and to get there in making customers successful. And there's also a lot of room for improvement, right? 90% of customers think companies could do better when it comes to onboarding. Only 2/3 of customers say that onboarding and what happens in that process post-sale is a huge contributing factor to whether they make a decision to continue with a company and start with a company in the first place. And this is a core belief for us at Arrows. Obviously, we're in onboarding day in, day out, but we really believe that retention and expansion starts on day one. It's not a thing that you can sort of bolt on later once you've sold a customer and they're coming up for a renewal, and you've got to figure out how to make retention and expansion happen. And then onboarding really is the first step and an ongoing step in making those customers successful and guiding them to the outcomes that they want. So let's get right into how you align on customer outcomes. So Shareil, I'm going to turn this over to you a little bit. We're going to use Arrows, the product, to do this. Full disclosure, we have built the product specifically for building a plan using these principles, but you could follow along in a spreadsheet or in not in Arrows if you so wish. The principles should be more widely applicable to building a plan as well. So I'm going to jump into Arrows, and Shareil, why is this the starting point for any plan?
Yeah, to really break it down and make it as simple as possible, why work on any steps that aren't driving customers to the thing they want to get out of this? And so to even oversimplify it, it's better to ask, especially as discovery happens throughout those early lifecycle moments. So if these questions are likely already being asked in sales or in marketing forms, what are your goals? What are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to accomplish? If not, for whatever reason, that is part of the process of aligning internally, making sure that those questions are answered. But then further, even on that first kickoff call or in that introduction email, reconfirming those goals. And this ultimately, what it lets you do is prevent yourself from just feature dumping and talking about every single possible thing that you can cover in onboarding. And that's not to say don't do that. It's just to say don't do it all in that first week or first couple calls or first couple interactions, and instead focus purely on that customer's desired outcomes. That gets them hooked, that gets them into the plan, that gets them taking progress, and ideally that gets them seeing that first bit of value realization that they signed up for. If that's the case, they are more inclined to keep going through your process and through your plans, and you can introduce other bits either later in that onboarding phase or whatever comes after that in your journey. But I think more importantly than all of that, it reduces the chance of early lifecycle churn, which is a big challenge that I know most of us are seeing, especially in month-to-month SaaS type models. So ask what customers' goals are and then capture that somewhere. And so if you are using something like a mutual action plan like Arrows, we have a little section up in the welcome page or welcome card where you can capture what those goals are. Generally, people coming to us are looking to increase their efficiency in onboarding, whether that's in time per rep spent on onboarding or capacity per rep. But point being, highlight whatever those goals or desired outcomes are, because now this becomes that foundational place where when inevitably you have to follow up with someone or nag them with a reminder or email to do task A, B, or C, they can at least cognizantly see, oh yeah, these are my desired outcomes, not Shareil's desired outcomes for me.
Right.
Now, ideally over time, those things align. Like the product should be generally solving for the things your customers are trying to solve with it. But things I see commonly happen here is we jump instantly into like talking about reports or dashboards, when the truth is at that early of a stage, a customer isn't worried about that quite yet. It's a great feature, but we'll get to it. So really understand what their goals are. Over time, you'll also have a generic version of usually what those desired customer outcomes are. So even if you haven't had the chance to ask me specifically what I'm trying to do, highlight some of those generic goals, but then also go back and ask and confirm, this is what most people are doing. Is this also your case or your goals for your business? If yes, great. Do you have specific metrics you're trying to hit? Let's make sure those are in here. So as Stuart's doing here, like I said, I want to ultimately increase speed and efficiency and reduce churn. Tying a number to it makes it really powerful. So let's say I want to reduce churn by 15% by the end of the quarter. It's a SMART goal, so there's a time frame, there's an action, and now there's something that we can check in on in that QBR, in that next call, in that renewal preparation to make sure that it's driving them towards their desired outcomes.
Yeah, and I think the thing that is really important is, as we mentioned, onboarding isn't just a thing, and making customers successful isn't just a thing that you can add on later. Ideally, this discovery process and identifying these desired outcomes that customers have is coming early in the process as well, right? Whether that's the type of content they're consuming in marketing, whether that's the business outcomes that are being identified in discovery during sales. Like the more that you can pass those things through, so that you have a starting point and some of those outcomes sort of already known, even if they're not as granular or not as even if there isn't as much depth as you would like to have, at least having a starting point means that you can verify outcomes rather than ask customers to continuously repeat themselves with every new team that they're talking to. And as Shareil mentioned, having it here in Arrows, this welcome card is the first thing that a customer will see when they open the plan for the first time, and it will also stay at the top of a plan. If I go to the view mode here, you'll see, and I'm inside of the welcome card itself, but if I go back to the plan, you'll see that this card is always at the top of the plan. So it's a great way to sort of keep that context and, as we'll get into here, at every stage be able to say, is this thing that we're doing actually aligned with that outcome that customers want? So
totally.
Wherever
you store this goal, make sure you also store it inside of your CRM, because ultimately you want everyone to have visibility into the customer's goals, right?
For sure, yeah. And I think that is, ideally you're able to continuously be discovering what the goals are, right? Like if some companies move faster than others, but just because they had this particular outcome when the deal closed and that was what was discovered by sales doesn't mean that by the time they get to renewal, by the time they get 6 months down the line, that their priorities haven't shifted, and or maybe they have new use cases, they have new things that are important to them, and it's being able to continuously identify and share those across everybody who's going to interact with them becomes pretty important to making sure that everything is aligned. So let's get into the creating the plan itself. I guess when we a lot of the time we talk about the plan, we're talking about the specific steps, the stages of the plan, the things that we're actually going to need to do during onboarding. So Shareil, how, and I know you have built and rebuilt and continuously iterating on the plan that we use with customers at Arrows, but for the folks that you're working with as you're onboarding them, it's all gets very meta here. What is the approach that you take to translating the things that maybe currently live in their head or live in a big internal checklist? What are the things, what's the process that you go through to translate that into, a plan that is repeatable and that can be shared with customers to make sure that they know what to do as well?
Sure. I think it's partly dependent on where you are as a business and where you are as a company. But for the most part, what I encourage people to do right out the gate is just list everything in your brain, all the steps that you think are required to go from point A to point B. Now, where point B can get a lot easier to manage is when you really know those outcomes. So instead of trying to overwhelm me with every single step, now I know I need a handful of steps that are at least going to get me to that first desired outcome. So this can help. You can still do the act and process of listing everything. Start in a Arrows plan, start in a Google Sheet, start wherever you want. Just list every single step that needs to happen. And so when I think about some of those initial moments, like I know I need you to ultimately pay your invoice. I know I need you to schedule a kickoff call with me. I want to learn a little bit more about your business inside of the onboarding phase of the journey. And don't worry so much about order or categories or buckets or phases just yet. Just put everything on a piece of paper. And you can fill in those gaps later. You can ultimately determine, do these steps need to happen now? Do they happen after one another? And this is that part where Stuart's referring to that I'm optimizing all the time. I am learning every day from our customers where they are getting stuck, where their goals align, what they're ultimately trying to accomplish. And I know that each customer is unique. That's not something that we overlook, right? But the truth is, if you're really trying to scale any of these efforts, and as I'm sure the audience knows here as CSMs and folks working on this, you don't have time to go in and customize every single thing for every single person every single time. So this is where putting all those steps that need to happen in your process. So in the Arrows case, there are things like uploading your process documents to us because I'm trying to understand what your process looks like. We offer people a shared Slack channel, making sure that I communicate to them what that looks like. And then in our world, you have to connect Arrows to HubSpot. So making sure that authentication is there, making sure to grant us access to HubSpot if that's part of the plan you're signing up for. In my case, the first goal is to try to get you to send your first plan to a customer using the Arrows product. And so what I know needs to happen is all of this getting started bits and pieces, if you will. And then you have to go in and start crafting exactly what Stuart's doing here, which is your version of that template. And I need you to do that. And in order for you to do that, I need you to first do all the setup stuff, but then ultimately map out your process. And so in my actual plan, I'll say craft your first template. Send it to the first customer. Let's review that template together. Let's prepare to send that template. This is nice. I wish someone would always work with me and write out my steps as I talk them out loud. But this is the act that I'm referring to. Like, take all the things in your brain and just start typing them on paper. And again, we'll worry about order and so on later. The other thing this gives you is a starting point, right? Because this process actually never ends. You're realistically always optimizing things. You're bringing in new features. You're bringing in new users. You're bringing in new thing altogether. Your company might go acquire another company. Now you have a whole other line of products that you serve. So by design, this isn't really ever done. And that is less to overwhelm you and more to encourage you to not spend so much time trying to make this thing perfect, because it's just never going to be the case if you are truly optimizing this and your business is growing and all those bits. So write out all those steps. A little bonus, if you'd like, go talk to someone who knows nothing about your product and share this list and tell them kind of what the end goal is, and then walk through some of these high level steps out loud and see if that conveys the thing you're hoping the outcome looks like. You should also do this internally with teams. So whether that's sales folks, CSM folks, other people in other departments, product, engineering, marketing, wherever, because what it'll do is help you gut check your own bias. I know our product through and through. I realize every day that my customers don't know my product through and through. And what seems like a really simple, easy thing to me is where customers are getting stuck. At least I have now data to go unpack that and move things around and add phases. But generally speaking, start at this highest level.
Yeah, and I think that it's a good reminder. You mentioned it here already, but I'm going to say it again, that this will change, right? So spending over optimizing or trying to over optimize before you make contact with customers with your plan is likely not going to be the best use of that time. You're going to be better off getting a plan in front of customers or testing it internally with teams, but getting some data that you can use to optimize. So I guess now we've essentially just created a big list, and I'm toggling back and forth between edit and view. This is a template, so we have some variable stuff in here too. But just so that you can see how, this is just a big long list of tasks, but Arrows does introduce some level of hierarchy, right? We have the welcome card up top, we have this the very next thing that we need folks to do is next, and then we just have our big long list of tasks. Obviously, we have done nothing beyond add the name of a task at this point. So, Shareil, once folks are at this point, you just have a big list. Arrows by default will introduce some level of hierarchy, right? We have the welcome card, we have what's next, and then we have our big long list. So, Shareil, once folks get to this point, how do you start to think about, the next step, which is turning this into something that is actually going to drive customers to take action? Right? This at this point isn't a whole lot different than just writing a list on a piece of paper, right? What's the first thing that you would do here?
Definitely do not share this with customers. This is what's going to actually overwhelm and frustrate people more. These are, again, thoughts in your head at this stage right now that you're trying to put on paper. Now, what you want to do is start to bucket like items into like categories so that those components ultimately level up and aggregate to that output that the customer is desiring. And so generally you can think about like a getting started phase, you can think about a setup or training or configuration phase, then you can think about a testing or using the product, reviewing the product phase, and then you can think about what's next. And so in our case, what we look at is, we call it let's make it official. It's that first, it's kind of a tricky way to get some of those miscellaneous things that are left over from sales completed. So if they haven't paid their invoice, for example, and we're making an exception and moving forward with them, we bucket that stuff into this let's make it official phase and make people feel a little bit extra special. And then in that phase, what I have categorized for my own plan is pay your invoice if you haven't. If a customer's already done that, I'll delete it, obviously, from their plan. And then ultimately tell me a little bit about yourself and schedule that kickoff call. Because what I need is to learn a little bit more about your business, and I need you to schedule that call so that we can kick off my process. I can go in more depth in this plan. I can better confirm your expectations. That lets me then go configure some of those later steps or customize them as needed once I know your exact desired outcomes. But I don't want to lead you down a path that might be the wrong one until I know a little bit more. So, welcome to Arrows is a good example. Pay your, whatever that is, welcome to your business, welcome to this company, welcome to this plan. Then I have kind of a getting started phase or account setup piece, however you want to refer to it as. And then in my case, I have two configurations. One is for the Arrow side, one is for the HubSpot side, depending on your product or service. You might have one, you might have two, you might have three. But I like to split those up because it makes it a little bit more digestible, and then I can have 2 or 3 or 4 tasks per phase, if you will, versus having 20 tasks that someone is instantly going to get stuck in and or overwhelmed with. And the risk you run here, I think, is also, we hear this a lot in sales and in marketing where we say, this thing is super easy to set up, super easy to deploy. Out the gate, you'll be using this product in no time. And then now there's 100 steps to complete before you can actually get there. The 100 steps aren't necessarily the problem. It's the expectation setting that's the problem. And so if it really requires 100 steps, that's okay. Phase those out into ways where these are the steps for week 1, these are the steps for week 2, these are the steps for week 3, and so on, if you want to time frame it. It could also just be like, again, those pieces to set up those like categories. But now you have all the things that need to be done. You have smaller categories of those things, which increases the chances that those things get done. If someone gets stuck in one of those categories, you have a higher likelihood of understanding Why? Because it's not this huge list of things, and instead it's a smaller category, which ultimately gives you the data that you need to optimize this thing or unpack it a little bit more, or maybe see why or where they were stuck.
Yeah, for sure. And you'll see, just to go back to this point where we can see what Shareil's talking about, that just because you have a lot of tasks doesn't mean that the customer has to see them all at once, right? So just by, we're still reordering things, we're still sort of playing around with that big list to get everything in the spot that we want it. But if I go back to view again, now we have the very next thing that's next. We have the current phase of the plan that we're working on, and then everything else is sort of out of the way down below. And one really nice thing that you can do here, to arrows of course, but just to show you, is you can turn sequential phases on, which will essentially say, okay, we're just focused on these 3 things right now. Until we do those things, we can't move on to the next thing anyway. Those other tasks will come later, but this is what's important right now. And I think that whether you turn that on or off, the thing that I always think about when designing an onboarding plan is dependency management, right? Like, what actually has to happen to enable the next thing to be possible, right? So in the arrows plan, for example, we ask customers to send us their current process. Until that's happened, we've reviewed, we've got on the call to discuss, like, what are we going to do to turn that into a plan? It's kind of hard for them to go ahead and, get ready to send a plan in arrows to a customer. So really being explicit about, these are the things that we're going to work on right now versus, all the things that we need to do ultimately to get to the outcome is an important distinction.
Right. This is also something we didn't touch on in that first mapping process. This also can include things you are doing that you want your customers to be aware that you are doing. And so there are steps in here where I, Shareil, have to go in and set something up in Arrows for you, or set something up in HubSpot for you. And there are plenty of those steps that are completely internal and you don't need to know about them. So don't overwhelm that piece of it. But there are components of that I like to expose in here for 2 reasons. One, to let people know that your part is done and this is on me to figure out. So don't worry, you've done your bits, congratulations. That makes people feel good. Now I'm going to do my piece of it and then communicate with you when it's done. The other part I use it for is some safety guardrails, because I oftentimes don't want people going so far ahead in some of the more advanced setup pieces that I do want to control some of that forward momentum, which sounds odd to try and slow things down. But there are moments where if someone's going too quickly through certain parts of your onboarding or implementation, it can have longer term detrimental effects because they don't fully grasp how to use the thing or why to use the thing. So the plan itself can also, and sometimes should include, internal things that you or your team are doing that you want the customer to know about. Again, it's more about, and this is now we're at kind of the third bullet point in the overall agenda, which is optimizing this thing to drive action. So you have all your steps, you have kind of your phases. Now you can start to determine which ones you want to expose up front, which ones are internal only that your team needs to just worry about, which ones are internal that you want people to see you're working on. And you have kind of a good high level overview of this thing. Again, run it by some people on the team, get some gut checks. Maybe if you have a customer that's gone through this recently, look back at how they did it. Did that confirm that this process works? Great. When you're here, now you can go in and add all the details. You can assign stuff. You can add due dates if you're using this version of the plan. If you're using Excel sheets or other tools, it helps to have assignees or due dates on tasks. But most importantly, it also helps to have descriptions. And so, or as important, not most importantly. I think all those things, all those 3 components are really important. So you have the kind of holistic view of what's going to happen. Now add those fine details. So schedule a kickoff call, seems straightforward, but where do I schedule? Is it a page? Is it an email? Is it what is the purpose of scheduling this call? And as you can see Stuart doing here, setting expectations for a customer. So we all by now know how internet Zoom calls work, and for the most part, most people know how things like HubSpot scheduling or Calendly or Google Calendars work. To make me more enticed to schedule this call, tell me why. And that is ultimately what Stuart's doing here, confirming that on this call, This is why you should schedule it, because we are going to reconfirm your goals. We're going to review that process together. We're going to cover all of these 50 steps that you just laid out in your plan. We're not going to worry about them. We just want you to know kind of what the next few weeks, months will look like. And we'll schedule all of our future calls now. This is that last bullet point is selfish for me, because I don't want to chase you down throughout this process and keep getting you, and I've seen this and I've heard this from a lot of folks that I talk to, from all the teams I've managed. That's the hard part. People are so busy, things fall off. What you don't want to happen is those things to fall off in this process. And then lastly, this calendar is actually embedded right into this task. So now if I'm the one viewing this plan, I know what I'm supposed to do. I know ultimately why I'm supposed to do it because of that description, and I can quickly see where to do it. Plus, you can mark this task as actually complete when you're done with it. That now I internally am aware that this task is done. And then to go further, you can see a due date attached here and someone who's going to be assigned to it ultimately. Stuart's using roles that we have inside of Arrows, which then ultimately will find who the point person is when that plan is shared, or who the coordinator is, and assign that individual name. That's important because this thing will trigger reminders and emails and all those pieces to let them know that, hey, this thing is coming up, there's a due date on this. But this single task now covers all the information one would need about scheduling a call, and it feels like one of those really simple ones, but it's easy to miss some of these minor details that then really drive that action, which is reminding people how to do it, why to do it, who's responsible to do it, when to do it, and where to do it. And that's a lot of things, but it's very clearly communicated in this singular task. So then you want to go through and do this to all your tasks, add descriptions, add buttons in there, add actions, add links, whatever you're trying to get conveyed. This process in itself will start to tell you, are there too many singular steps inside one of my steps? So if you tell someone to go set up a specific permission, for example, as part of your configuration, and then as you're writing the description, you find yourself putting 10 bullet points of, to set up your permissions, you have to do ABC, you have to log into this tool, you have to do XYZ over here. You likely are jamming too many things into a single step. That is the biggest cause where people get stuck in a process. That's where that bias comes in. That's where doing all those gut checks are helpful. That's where mapping out all your steps to start is helpful, because you can prevent that exact thing from happening and really make each of these individual tasks something that a customer can take action on. And then a bonus or pro tip here is make some of those first tasks easy. Like, don't add a form in that first task that has 20 values that you need filled out. Don't add the most complex automation or workflow or configuration piece of your tool as step one. You want psychologically folks to get that momentum, to feel like they're making progress, to be encouraged to come back to this thing. If you do that, it doesn't really matter how long this thing is, because now you're ingraining in me that, oh, I did my task, something happened, it's moving me one step closer to my desired outcomes, which are listed front and center for me every time I view this plan.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I think it's something that's often overlooked, is that, and why sort of going through this process of just listing everything out and then moving it around, is that the order can have such a huge impact on the amount of momentum, or the momentum that customers are able to build through the plan. One thing that I love to do in the plans that I'm sending is to actually have the first task be something that is already done. So let's say that, I would leave this pay your invoice task, even if in every case it is already done. I would just mark it off complete, so that when a customer lands in the plan for the first time, there is already progress. You'll see in just a second when we use this plan inside of HubSpot, make this a plan versus a template, that will then show the progress through the plan as non-zero, right? And just having that sort of initial starting point not being a blank slate can be really motivating. And once you sort of pair that with, like Shareil said, the first task being something that is quick and easy for the customer to do and feel like they made progress, is much more encouraging for them to keep going.
Yep.
So at this point, I know there's obviously a lot more that we would need to do to make this a plan that would be ready. We'd have to add descriptions and due dates and all those things for each of these tasks. And Shareil mentioned some of the reasons for wanting to make sure that every task has an assignee and every task has a due date, so that you can make sure the right people are looped in at the right time. But how do you think about, communicating this plan? It's one thing that I think we see a lot, or that we see get overlooked a lot, is folks we've sort of have been guilty of this ourselves, and something you have to be intentionally thoughtful about is, okay, so I built my plan, now what, right? Like, how do I make sure that the customer that I want to get to this outcome knows about the plan, is able to reference that plan at the right time? How do you think about that communication process?
Yeah, you're touching on a bigger topic, which is ultimately handoffs internally. And what we're describing now is going from that sales cycle to the success cycle, or however it is viewed in your organization. That step between the thing going from prospect to now customer to I'm done selling you, here's Shareil, your onboarding rep for the next few months, weeks, whatever it looks like. So a couple things. The more aligned the internal teams are, the better this customer experience is. Now, the truth is, all of us have bad internal processes. We all have missing CRM fields. We all have sales deals that need to get closed on the 31st of the month, and we miss the communication. That's all normal. We're all humans. That's going to happen. The goal is to reduce that, because what you don't want is your customers to feel that pain. The other thing you don't want is to blindly send them a plan like this with 50 steps without any sort of understanding as to why. And so what we really like to do and encourage doing is introducing it via email, which is standard communication. Better yet, jump on a call where the sales rep is closing that deal and introduce yourself. But ultimately, what you want to do is reiterate what this thing is and why you, the customer, should care about it. So here's an example of a introduction email that we use. What you want to do is acknowledge who you are, or remind them if you did jump on that call. So, hey Sarah, great to meet you. I was on that call with so-and-so. Why are you getting this email from me? Because I am the one now who's going to take you over the finish line and ultimately reconfirming some of those goals. You wanted visibility into your revenue data. You wanted to increase your onboarding speed by 15%. You wanted to reduce churn. This is, again, very helpful if you have those notes and that relationship with your sales team, because you can instantly in here make it very specific. If it's not very specific here, you can, again, generalize some of those outcomes. But then if you're going to generalize, make sure explicitly in there that you say, once we get a chance to talk, we will confirm your specific goals. This is what most people are looking for, and that's more reason for someone to join that call with you. Third, why? Why are we doing this? What's the point of this goal? That touches, again, on what's about to come. We're going to work towards your goals, and together we're going to do it. And then access to wherever these steps live. So if it's an attachment, see below. If it's in an Excel sheet, whatever. If it's in an arrows plan where you can link to the whole plan or link to each individual task, link that thing in here. We specifically like to link to the first task so that, again, you can increase the chances. If you pair that with the task being straightforward, you can increase the chances of that early momentum, which increases that ongoing chance of them continuing to make momentum. So what we're saying here is, hello, this is who we are. Here are our goals. Here's the first thing I need you to do. Click here and go right in there and do it. That will give you the description, the how to do it, the why to do it, all that stuff. You don't need to overwhelm, if you have it set up that way, you don't need to overwhelm here with due dates and all of the steps that are to come. Just focus on the thing that's most immediate. And then lastly, remind them, in our case, we're asking them to go to our tool. And what we want to do is remind them that you don't have to worry about setting up a password. You don't have to worry about some sort of setup thing for the arrow side of it, because that I could read that and think, I will do this later because right this second I don't have time to go set up another password or username. So instead, what I'm getting ahead of, and these are objections ultimately we've heard in our own process, which is why we've optimized this email. We have like 50 versions of this. This is the one that's currently being used and working the best. And obviously this gets also optimized as needed. So if someone's already done that first thing, if they've never were on that call, you can tweak those pieces to make it fit your needs. But what you want to communicate clearly is, again, the same things you're putting on tasks. Who you are, why we're doing this, when we're going to do it, what's the first thing to do, and then how to go do it. This is I'm very guilty of this myself, and I've seen this with a lot of our customers. This is still setting expectations. It's still letting people know exactly what's next, and you don't have to overwhelm with all the 20 steps in that first phase in this email. That is where things get lost. That's where things get overlooked. That's where things get missed, and you don't have visibility into them being done or not done. So the more clear you can make it, the more concise you can make it, the more obvious you can make it what this is. One thing I didn't touch on is subject line. in there also specify what it is with how many emails we're getting in today's world. I am very guilty of this. I try to make cute subject lines and make them enticing and make them fun and add emojis. No one actually cares. They want to know what this email is and who it's from and what we're doing here. So specify this is your company and this is our company and this is the onboarding plan, this is the implementation plan, this is so on and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get into, I know we want to make sure we have time for questions here as well. So we've been building out a template in Arrows. Let's talk about the data side of this. How would you get data to go and optimize this? We've mentioned that a few times that, creating this plan in a vacuum is one thing, testing it with your team is one thing, but ultimately putting it in front of customers and then being able to, get insight into what is actually happening and make changes is important. So, sure, I'd love to hear, maybe I'll go into HubSpot and I'm going to create a plan and attach the template that we just made to a customer. But sure, what's something that you have found as we've been running this process with customers, as we've been iterating on our own plan? What's something that has been sort of unexpected or a change that you've made based on the data that we've seen?
Yeah, big one is the two big ones are moving tasks around. One, I just had stuff out of order. And that was because I was initially just featured, and this was by design. I'm building a new process, right? And so part of building a new process is usually having things out of order. What I have learned is some of those bigger items, and this is where HubSpot has helped me see this because we use a pipeline to map all this data into, and we can physically see where they're at and then attach days spent on task, days spent on phase, and so on to it. What it has helped me identify is which are those tasks that our customers are taking the longest on. That's my first step. Then looking at those tasks and asking myself that question I touched on earlier. Have I brought my own bias into this and inserted too many things and on something I thought was super simple, but now is causing customers to get stuck? So I've gone in and literally taken single tasks and broken them up into one step up as a phase and then listing out those specific steps in there because I wanted to make sure progress keeps going. And then tied to that is moving them later in the process. I realized over time that some of the things I was asking customers to do early in our process actually could still happen later and result in the same ultimate outcome or time to onboarding or reducing in churn. And so I do a lot of A/B testing with that kind of stuff around let's move this, let's remove it completely from the plan and see if it breaks anything on certain phases or steps. The other thing I've learned is, so in my world, the first 3 or 4 weeks, customers are doing a lot on their side. They're setting up plans, they're setting up templates, they're crafting their process, we're working on that piece of it. And then I would come in after that time and start doing stuff on the HubSpot side for them. And what I have learned is I can actually do that in tandem while they are setting up their pieces. And so it helps me with my overall goal, which is reducing my time to onboarding because I'm doing my parts alongside customers doing their parts. So for example, as we set up these templates, what you can do is sync these two properties in HubSpot. So when this task gets marked done, something in HubSpot appears as done. I would wait a while to go into a customer's HubSpot account, whether they're giving me access or encouraging them to do it, to have them do that part of it. And instead, I am now doing that while they are crafting their templates, because what it does is the second they are ready to send a customer a plan, all of the data is already there, or the house for the data is already there, the properties, the fields, the reports that will eventually be filled out. They're blank at that moment, but they are now in your account, and that's part of the added value of buying Arrows. So what it does psychologically to a customer is it confirms, oh yeah, I need to go do my part because Shareil has done his part, and the faster I do my part, the faster I'll get value from the things I'm paying for, which is ultimately seeing all this data, seeing all this progress, or maybe lack thereof inside of HubSpot, which is the thing I'm paying you all to help me do better. And it still aligns with my bigger goal for customers and usually their desired outcomes, which is to put a better customer experience in front of their customers. And so the faster they get their plans going, the more likely they are to improve that experience. We believe in that part of the design of the tool. And then because I've learned now, instead of, and this is literally learning from the plan, instead of waiting for them to do all those pieces for a couple of weeks and then me jumping in and having to use another week or two to set up my pieces, Now I end the onboarding phase a lot earlier in the process because both of us are working towards that first goal. Then we can schedule our recurring calls. Then we can go in and optimize. Then we can do all those bits. But now I have shown you value. I have shown you the thing you initially paid for sooner than even you might have expected it or that was promised to you. So I've over-delivered, and we are still progressing through onboarding. And that's all solely from learning over the last few months where customers were getting stuck, where I was spending more time, and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. And having that data available, and obviously this is meta, right? Like we're looking at an onboarding report inside of HubSpot, which is a very similar report to what Shareil's looking at in our own account for the customers that we're onboarding. But like Shareil mentioned, like having data available, having data about what are the tasks that are, the in-flight plans are currently stuck on, or how long they have been on the current thing, if they're, are they tracking to hit our sort of baseline and an expected time to complete onboarding, or are they falling behind? Are there specific places or repeating places where customers are getting stuck? Is really how to best optimize the plan without, if you don't have that data, you have to go on much more, sort of trial and error, or, digging through data that is in a multitude of different places and not necessarily directly comparable if you're running an entirely different process with every customer. So, Shareil, what's the thing that you look at? I mean, just for a couple of minutes here, what's the thing that you look at as? I know you mentioned moving specific tasks that you were doing earlier in the process. What is the metric that you're using as like that is this is how we're defining good onboarding or successful onboarding, when ultimately, getting customers to the outcome is the thing that we're trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of things I go into how I'm ultimately measuring that outside of this plan piece of it, or even outside of HubSpot. But a lot of it is qualitative and quantitative feedback. So we send like surveys at the end of onboarding. We try to ask people how things are going. Does this align with your expectations? Are we meeting your goals? So constantly checking in with customers is a majority of it. And then 2, it's unpacking the data inside of HubSpot to validate, is that true or not? And in addition to Arrow's plan data, we also have product data coming in to HubSpot. So how are you using our tool? Are you actually doing the things we're encouraging you to do? How many plans are you sending? Are those plans working? To what degree are they working? So we have the upper hand of seeing all that data, and I take advantage of that to then be able to actually coach and optimize. And so why getting them to that initial value moment faster is important, because it increases my chances that they're using the product, which is the goal of those first few phases. And that's why I sped up some of my bits, because that was contingent on them ultimately using the full capacity of the product. That's why I do that earlier now. So on average, it went from about 6 weeks to 4 weeks, which really what that means is now that buys me 2 more weeks to really optimize with you. And I still at the high level tell people it's going to take 6 weeks. I'm also now surprising and delighting because we're getting there faster. But I'm also then using those 2 weeks to say, okay, how was that first experience? What did you learn? Here's how I think about it. Here's how others think about it. So we've really gone from the how-to pieces of it to the why you should keep doing this over and over and over again, because it doesn't actually end when I'm done talking to you, right? Like you have to still go use the product, use the service, continue to use it, hopefully grow, hopefully not churn. So the faster I can get to that moment, the better chance I give myself to really educate you on the why stuff, to dig into your process, to then go back and look at your plan and say, oh, we noticed the first couple customers get stuck here. That's a lot easier to do at this stage than 6 months in, where that hasn't happened, or now there's huge volumes. It's harder to unpack. It's harder to see those percent growths or those percent changes. So I'm trying to selfishly set myself and the Arrows team up for success, while trying to make sure that you are obviously setting yourself up for success with the tool and with the product and so on. That's a long-winded answer, but underneath that is qualitative feedback, it's quantitative feedback, it's understanding what's happening in the product. And that don't let that overwhelm or scare you either. It doesn't have to be some robust health score or some robust tool or reporting. Like you saw the dashboard that we're powering with Arrow's data. It's pretty straightforward. Who's the plan? Who's working on it? What are the due dates? even in that view, I noticed a couple things that alert me, which are, oh, there was a handful of plans that didn't, or a handful of tasks that didn't have someone assigned to them. So that gives me a quick chance to go in and assign someone. So it's little things like that, that if you can catch them and then build process around. So catching them is one thing. Ideally, you're not replicating that over and over and over again. And that's why I harp so much on optimization is as these problems occur, how do you proactively address them for the next customer? You can't change what's already happened, but you can prevent it from happening again. And so we've made all these optimizations, we've made these tweaks to the plan, we've changed the way we think about data and reporting, and all of that continues to lead us down, for the most part, the right path. There's been plenty of tests in there that slow things down or cause some issues or have to have some re-explanation, if you will. That's going to be part of the process. That is learning, that is growing, that is optimizing. Know that will likely happen. But overall, the net sum is a faster onboarding experience for our customers. It's not faster just by speed. I'm not just taking out critical moments that have to happen. Instead, I'm taking out those moments that maybe don't have to happen this second, but can happen after you're onboarded, or can happen at the 6-month mark, or can happen with some self-guided videos or resources or something like that. So really what I'm learning is what is the most critical? How do I make sure that aligns to your goals? Ultimately, how do I give our product teams and sales teams and marketing teams feedback that, hey, these are the main goals that I'm seeing most obviously and most commonly. Let's be sure that we're building new features for this. Let's be sure that we're optimizing marketing for this. Let's be sure that every sales rep is touching on this piece of outcome that most customers seem to want. And in time, it makes my life a lot easier because every customer that comes over from that point is a little bit more qualified, a little bit more understanding, a little bit more aligned. And anytime that's not the case, again, go back and look at the process, look at what's being sold, look at how it's being described. And that is why it actually never ends, because we're always in this cycle of optimizing. That can feel daunting and it can feel like it's going to be harder than it really is. Keep in mind, you don't have to optimize this whole thing every time. Optimize one step, optimize one description, optimize a singular phase in there. In time, that'll all build, that'll all gain momentum, that'll all continue to show you the progress. If you have the data in HubSpot, you can quickly see when that's not the case, or in wherever you're ever tracking it. So that's why it's really important to observe both the qualitative stuff and the quantitative stuff. What you don't want to happen is 6 months in, 9 months in, then learn from a customer that, oh crap, my expectations were misset. Oh, I didn't teach you how to do this. I've had this happen to me, even at Arrows, where someone churns and then they tell me, your tool didn't do this. And I'm like, it does do that. That's one of the things it does best. But that's on me. Either I didn't educate you, or you were unaware of it, or you were aware of it too late in the process, and you've already been talking to a competitor, and I've already made the switch. So how do you avoid that unexpected churn or unexpected ghosting that happens to us all the time, and really make those future conversations non-events? Make the renewal a non-event. Make the expansion conversation a non-event. Add so much value up front that it is unlikely that someone's going to unexpectedly leave you. Plus, if you foster that kind of environment, they are more likely to give you feedback. They are more likely to show up to your check-in calls. Same with QBRs and all those. Like, that should also have a plan. They should also have expectations. They should also have clear steps of what to do in there and when to do it. So keep that customer experience that you have, that we work all so hard on making so positive when it comes to marketing and sales. Keep that journey going through as your customers progress with you, and it increases the chance that they'll stick around longer, and it decreases the chances that they'll churn, which is ultimately the biggest value of, in my opinion, a good onboarding process, good handoffs, good data management of this whole thing.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point to like tie it right back to where we started with identifying and discovering those outcomes that customers are actually trying to get to continuously, right? Everybody, and you mentioned this with you don't need necessarily a complex health score, right? Which everybody wants to have. That is the feature that everybody's looking for. It's the perfect health score. But ultimately, what your customers are trying to achieve is not data that you will ever get in your product automatically, right? That is going to have to be things that you are discovering, that you're having conversations about, that you're building rapport and identifying, and those things will also change, right? So just because a customer is quote unquote healthy on day one, when they're most excited, they just close this deal, they have high hopes for product, which hopefully, if you're setting expectations, you can actually meet. But, business priority shifts, the climate that they're operating their business in changes. So keeping that outcome front and center at all times, if you are helping them and there is a clear path to achieving that outcome, churn is unlikely, right? It's when you get out of alignment that it sort of almost doesn't matter what you do if you're not in alignment, because there will always be an alternative solution that actually gets them to that outcome.
Right. We have a question from Michael on what's the difference between attaching arrows plans to deals or tickets. Ultimately, let me take a step outside of arrows. Deals are traditionally associated with kind of sales and pre-sales. Tickets are usually associated with support and those types of functions beyond the point of sale. The second factor is which version of HubSpot you have. If you don't have the full operations hub, you might not have access to the pipelines that come with tickets or the automations or the workflow. So part of it's dependent on your business and your HubSpot setup. From the lens of arrows, we created the plans to be able to attach to either of those objects, so you could pick and choose depending on I use both. We like because we have multiple places where we use arrows when we're working in sales, and we use our plans from the sales cycle to hand off into onboarding. That lives in a deal pipeline for us. And then we have ongoing support pieces, or once they are a customer and working now with officially customer success, we're using tickets if we're introducing plans in that world. My personal things I like about tickets is you can associate multiple tickets to a single deal. So if you wanted to have a bunch of plans and those roll up to that initial deal, and then that rolls up to the company record, if that works for you, great. The more generic answer is I like to have every moment in the life cycle have some sort of reference point inside of HubSpot. So the renewal should have a deal, any growth that happens should have a deal associated with it, any support issue that comes in should have some sort of ticket associated with it. So as long as it's captured, it kind of depends on two things: which version of HubSpot you're paying for and which features you have access to, and what makes the most sense for your business. What I see traditionally with our customers, the larger and more complex success teams get, the more likely they are to want to work in their own kind of world or object or processes. So they lean towards tickets and then attach tickets to deals. I've also seen large organizations use deals through and through the whole thing. So we built it in a way that gives you that flexibility. And if you ever want to,
you can also
pull up.
Yeah. You can also move an arrows plan between objects or between different deals, for example. Just because you start in one place doesn't mean you have to stay in one place. We often see folks who will, their first use case that they'll implement arrows with is the end of the sales cycle into onboarding, and then later on they'll introduce arrows plans for other events in the life cycle, and they may move to tickets at that point. But yeah, this is a question that we get a lot, and there's a lot of it depends. But from an arrows perspective, as Shareil mentioned, it's pretty flexible.
Yeah, the customer sees the plan either way. They don't care what object. And this is kind of what I alluded to. While you're figuring out your internal process, great. The customer knows, as far as they're concerned, here are the steps, here's the plan, this is what I have to worry about. I don't really care what object Michael has it attached to in his CRM. Yeah,
and I think this is something that you always harp on, Shareil, is that the plan gives you an opportunity to present a cohesive experience for the customer, even as you're figuring out those internal pieces, right? So even if you're running internal experiments and changing things around, as long as the customer has a plan that shows them what to do next and when they have to do it, even if it's a quote unquote suboptimal version, they don't know that, right? They are not making the same comparison between versions that you are. So whenever they have that plan, they have that transparency, they know what's next.
Right. I mean, I've worked with newer customers who literally flip-flop between deals and tickets as they're trying to figure out what works best, which is fine. You go figure it out. Your customers are unaware that you're figuring that out.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we are just about at time here. If you have any other questions, drop them in the chat or shoot us an email. I should mention this at the top, but we will be sending out the recording for this along with sort of a walkthrough of all the steps that we walked through live here so that you'll have them for reference. You can create an Arrows account for free and play around and sort of create that plan template. Or if you really want to dive deep into this, if you want to get to the point where you're sending and optimizing your plan with customers, then absolutely come and chat with us. We would love to help. Shareil is very hands-on with with customers and, is in this day in, day out with customers. So if you want to, get some access to Shareil and optimize that process, then yeah, let's chat. But thank you all so much for being here. Shareil, thank you for doing this as always. And
My pleasure.
we will
Thank you, everyone.
talk to you soon.